Hi everyone, my name is Nancy. I'm very excited to be here, and I'm very excited because I'm going to talk about open access, and I love talking about open access. I work for the Knowledge Media Institute at the Open University, and I work in a project which is called CORE, and it stands for Connecting Repositories. And I'm going to explain what CORE is and what it does, but just to give you a very, very brief sentence, CORE is like Google Scholar, but it's even better. And before I explain what CORE does, what I will do is that since my presentation comes in the beginning of this seminar, and since it's entitled as Putting Open Access into Practice, then I'm going to get in the logistics about open access, and I'm going to talk about open access routes, what can make open access available, and then we'll go about aggregating, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the core system. Now, before we talk about open access, let's consider a little bit the research cycle. And when we talk about the research cycle, we mean when and how someone, and that person could be a researcher, comes up with an idea and then tries to write this idea down. And then this idea gets the whole body. And then the author of the idea decides to go to the funder and ask for money for this project. And then the money comes in. The author and the researcher is very excited because there's going to be some research that is going to take place. And then after that is the publication of the output. Now, open access refers to the publication of the output, the end result. But in this seminar, you're not only going to talk, and we don't talk already only about the publication, but we also talk about other types of research outputs throughout the whole research life cycle. So generally speaking, and very briefly, in only 4 points, this is the research life cycle, and those are the things that we are going to deal with open access right now. Now, we should also consider who does research. And as you can see in this slide, I have included all the world map because all people in all countries, in all places around the world can make research. All people have the right to make research. All people have ideas that they can make research. And all people also have the right to ask for money to have research. All people have the right to have access to other people's research. All people have the right to present their research results. So everyone in the world make research. But how much does research cost to access it? And this is where open access comes into place. Because does it always cost too much to access research? Does it always cost too little to access research? How much money do you pay as a student? How much money do your research institutions pay for subscription costs or to buy journals, to buy books, to buy in general resources that researchers and students need in order to be able to gain the knowledge they want for the research? How much does it cost to buy an article? How much does it cost to make an individual subscription in one journal title? Now, those are some examples of how much it costs. And there are only examples of 5 journals, but if you go and you spend your time doing some research, you are going to recognize that the money that are required to gain access to the outputs that everyone needs is a lot. For example, one example here that I have included is Nature. So it's only £2. Well, first of all, a disclaimer, some of the prices are in pounds, some of the prices are in euros, some of the prices are in dollars. I didn't make this to confuse you, it's just how I would find the information online. So in Nature, £2.65 per issue, £1.35 in British pounds. Cell, online access only, $266. And then New England Journal of Medicine, that's a different example when you don't buy the subscription, but let's say, for example, you want to have access to only one article. And in that case, it's access this article for 24 hours, and that's $20. and access content from 1990 until present for 24 hours, and this is $35. So for 24 hours, you have to do the best you can in order to take advantage of this article, because after this hour, you're not going to have access to the article again. And if you need it, you will need to buy it again. So that's awesome. Now, Journal of Sound and Vibration. The reason that I made this, I took also these two different topics of journals. The first line is medical sciences. The second line is engineering. It's because my partner, he's a mechanical engineer, and he's really in love with this Journal of Sound and Vibration. And he really needs to publish in this one in order to be established in his career as a researcher. So those are things also that I know that a lot of you think about when you talk about your research careers. Now, the Journal of Sound and Vibration, 8,186 euros, but what it does, it gives you access for 5 years, and then you're saying, oh, okay, so I'm not going to buy something that it's not good, it's a good deal, looks like it, but then you read, and it says access to 4 years of archive. So it means that you're buying the current year, and then you're buying access to the 4 past years. So I don't know if this is going to be a good deal for some of you again. And then structural engineering online, 378. So in my mind, to be frank, I thought that the medical sciences journals were the most expensive. It turns out, though, that there are other fields out there that they are expensive as well. Now, think of yourselves writing a paper. How many articles do you think that you are going to need? How much money do you think that you are going to need? If you write a paper, let's say that it's going to be just an assignment, a week's assignment, perhaps you're going to need 15, 20, 25, yes? Maybe 10, minimum. If you write a conference paper, perhaps 30, 35. If you write a journal article, perhaps 60. How much money do you think that it's going to need to pay for these subscriptions? And now we're talking about only individual subscriptions. The truth is that we don't have data about institutional subscriptions. So we don't know how much money institutions pay when they buy those journal packages, only because journals do not allow libraries to share this information with the rest of the world. And I don't know if you've seen recently that in France, the national government was making negotiations with Elsevier to get subscriptions to journal articles for the French institutions. And the French government gave a lot of money to buy subscriptions from the publisher, and it was not allowed from the publisher to share with the rest of the French community, the French taxpayers, how much money they paid to make this negotiation, to make this decision with the publisher. And then it was a couple of open access advocates who managed to get this information out and post it in a blog post, and this made very big news into the open access world. So information that we need, information that we don't have, information for money that comes out of taxpayers' pockets, and information that probably we should know. Now, this is where open access comes in place. First of all, just to give the definition for open access. Open access was made possible because we have technology and we have the internet. And open access means online access to research outputs, peer-reviewed scientific research outputs, and they are available for everyone to read. The end user doesn't have to pay anything to access the output. And what makes also open access possible is the fact that the authors of the research output have decided not to keep the rights of the article they have written, but to share the rights with the rest of the world. And there are different ways to share your rights, and we're going to talk about this a little bit further on, but Open access is made possible because an author has decided not to have an all rights reserved license on the output in question. And then the beauty also of open access is the fact that users are not only able to read, download and read the research output, but also the fact that the information can be reused. Users can build on the information. It can be crawled from computers and other systems. And data can be used that accompany the research output. It can be used in a software and in different machines. Sorry. Now we're getting to routes to open access. There are two routes to open access. The one is the access through the green road. When we talk about colors, the green road to open access or the gold road to open access, the colors don't mean something in reality. They're just colors that one of the founders of the open access movement, Stefan Harnad, and probably you know his name because he's very big into the movement, he was just thinking one day and he was like, yes, open access through journals and open access through open archives or repositories. I think there should be colors about these two different routes to open access. And I'm going to name the repositories green and the journals gold. But apart from that, the colors don't mean anything else. Now, the repositories, they can be two types. They can be institutional repositories hosted in one institution, may that be academic institution or research institution, and they can be subject repositories. The academic repositories are a little bit different than the subject repositories because they collect the fruits of the institution. So the institution may have more than one department, and the institution doesn't only produce research papers, but it also produces other types of outputs, such as dissertation and thesis, or something that it's not as official. For example, maybe PowerPoint presentations. Maybe one department has a music, maybe one university has a music department, and one of the products of the university may be the recordings of the musicians from the music department. So the institutional repositories, they have a broader variety of outputs that they contain, and it's not always and only research papers. For example, one research repository is the Open Research Online, which is the repository at the Open University, where I currently work. Now, we also have subject repositories. The subject repositories, they mainly collect information in a subject field. For example, the archive.org is the first repository ever, the first subject repository ever, and includes information on physics, mathematics, chemistry, issues related to particle physics, and papers related to that. Now, repositories do not conduct peer review. In my previous job, for example, I was a repository manager. It was not that the authors would come to me and they would say, oh, since you are the repository manager, can you peer review this paper, please? Because this was not part of my job. As you understand, I don't know everything. So repositories do not conduct peer review. What they do, though, is that they host papers that they are peer-reviewed somewhere else. And that somewhere else is a journal, or somewhere else can be a conference paper that it's a peer-reviewed conference paper. So they host outputs in reality that were peer-reviewed somewhere else. And apart from the research outputs, they can host preprints, postprints. As we said earlier, they can host final versions of outputs. They can host posters, and they have a wide selection of outputs. The beauty of institutional repositories is this standard on the very last bullet point, which is the OAI PMH. That stands for Open Archives Initiative Metadata Harvesting Protocol. And in plain English, it means that you get into Google, you're doing a Google search with keywords, and then you get the information that you want in front of you without having to visit each separate repository that you may have in your mind. For example, you're looking information about, let's say you're a student in medicine. You don't have to go to the repository at Harvard Medical School, the University of Nottingham Medical School, or UCL Medical School. You go into a search engine, you do a Google search, the information comes in front of you just because of this protocol. We have open access journals, the second route to open access, and it's the gold route to open access. We have the pure open access journals, and that was when publishers and people who were conducting research started realizing that the current publishing world, it's not so much up to date with the technology and what researchers need and what the society needs. So what happened is that some people created the open access journals, and those are the pure, as we call them, open access journals. Pure because they were open access journals from their initial foundation, and because they don't have a subscription-based model on them. They only have an open access model on them, which means that the end user pays nothing to access the article. But some of them, they may have restrictions based on the licenses. And we're going to talk about licenses a little bit further on. Some others, what they do is that they may be charging a publication fee, what we call as an article processing charge. The article processing charge is nothing more but the funders realizing that it's not only part of their mission to fund the conduction of the research, to fund the labs that may be required, the research assistants, and everything that is being required during the conduction of the research, but they also need to fund the end result of the research, which is the research output, which is what comes out. And this is why funders now support gold open access publishing and support article processing charges. Some institutions, they have funds for article processing charges for their members in their institution, but for pure open access journals only. We also have the subscription-based journals, which means that publishers realized that open access was getting big, and publishers also wanted to come into practice and play the game play the funders' game for open access policies. And what they've done is that instead of having only the subscription-based model, they also introduced the open access model into their publications. So the way that they operate is that they have the subscription-based model, but sometimes, for example, if you go into a Taylor and Francis website, you may find that 10 articles are closed access, you have to pay to access them, but one of them may be signed as open access and you have access to this specific article. So what happens is that all the volume comes out as a subscription-based volume, but one or two or maybe more articles, they may be openly accessible. And those articles are articles that someone has paid an article processing charge. The authors have paid an article processing charge. Now, the differences between the pure open access journals and the subscription-based open access journals regarding the article processing charges is that for the vast majority, subscription-based journals, they charge more money than the open access journals. And now, especially in the UK, because we have policies that they are preferentially gold open access policies, we face the problem of what we call as double dipping, which means that from one point of view, someone pays a subscription, and from the other point of view, someone else, the same person, also pays an article processing charge. So institutions pay the subscription to access the journal title, and then the institution's authors, professors, researchers, postdoc, pay an article processing charge. What happens now in the UK is that there are negotiations between the institutions and the publishers so that UK doesn't do double dipping in publishers. But the problem is that publishers do not recognize that they have a benefit from the first year, which was last year. They don't recognize that I have a benefit from the second year, which is this year. They say that they're only going to be in position to see their benefits only in the third year and onwards. So for 3 years, we're going to be paying double dipping, and after that, we're going to see if institutions are going to have a decrease in the amount of subscriptions that they pay to access those articles. Now, Creative Commons licenses, as I said earlier, it's not possible to have open access without having limited or no restrictions on copyrights. And let me also make something clear, because I don't want all of you to get confused and perhaps to get worried. What happens with Creative Commons license, and what is she talking about? Does she mean that we have to give all our rights? And does she mean that our papers need to be on the public domain? And what about my words and everything? Creative Commons doesn't mean that everything is going to be in the public domain. Open access doesn't want your papers to be in the public domain. When the Budapest Open Access Initiative was signed, and it was the initiative that put open access, gave open access a meaning, the way that it has now, it said that in research, especially in publicly funded research, the rights that the authors should have are the rights to be acknowledged properly and cited properly for the research that they have conducted. So Creative Commons licenses, along with open access, means that no rights go to public domain. Authors have the right to take control of their publications, but there is a difference between restricting the use and reuse of my publication, and there is a difference between making my publication available for everyone to read. Now, the Creative Commons licenses, Creative Commons is an organization from Lawrence Lessig in the United States. He created the organization so that he helps people who don't want to reuse an all rights reserved license to be able to license their works. Because as you understand, doing this by yourselves, it could be a little bit difficult. And this is why they have created these standard licenses which can be combined together, and then you can create either a very liberal license or a very restrictive license. Starting from the top, we see the very liberal license. It only requires the attribution of the outputs that you see, and then we have non-derivative works, we have also the share-alike license, and we have non-commercial license. So, for example, the very last image, that it has the C, C, B, Y, and C and D, it's one of the most restrictive ones. It means that you have to attribute the content, it allows non-commercial use, it allows non-derivatives out of the output. Now, the beauty of the Creative Commons licenses is the fact that they have 3 different layers. The first layer is a layer that I can understand. It's a layer that you don't need to be a lawyer, you don't need to have a lot of knowledge about the licenses, not a lot of knowledge about copyright. The second layer is the layer that lawyers understand. It's something that, you know, it's all Greek to me, and I am Greek, so nothing understands. And then the third layer is the fact that they have a machine-readable layer, which means that if one website is under a Creative Commons license and you want to do a search and find resources, websites with Creative Commons license, then you will be able to find it. If a presentation is with a PowerPoint presentation is with a Creative Commons license, such as this one, then you are going to be able to find it. If you want papers with Creative Commons licenses, software, and all this information, you're going to be able to find it. So 3 different layers, and the beauty of that is that you have access to machine readability information. Now, yes.
So anyone can just take this picture there and put it. Oh, sorry.
I can do both.
Yeah, just a small question. So anyone can just take this picture there and put it in the corner of a presentation before you put it online. It's accessible to anyone. You don't have to ask for any rights for this, right?
Well, The thing is that when you use Creative Commons licenses, what you write is yours, and you have the rights to license it the way that you want. Now, what happens with my presentation is that I've been using images, as you've seen. And some of the images, I've taken them and I've reshaped them, and I've done a lot of things. In order for me to place the CC BY license down there, it means that I went online and I found only Creative Commons images with a CC BY license, which means that you cannot take an image that it says, you know, maybe like a huge copyright stamp at the back and use it with a Creative Commons license. So you have to be sure and you have to know what is this that you are using. You cannot share with a Creative Commons license something that it's not yours and it has another license. And that license, it can be something different. It can be either all rights reserved or it can be a more restrictive Creative Commons license. Maybe if we want to go back, the share-alike license also is something that you need to take into consideration. The share-alike means that you are allowed to use this output, this image, this presentation, only if you share it with the same license that it appears over there. Yes.
Yeah, I was a fraction of a second before you. I just wanted to make a comment which reflects on the previous slides, the green and the gold thing, as well as now when we start to talk about the copyrights, and that's what the kind of knowledge are we really discussing, and a thing which most of the people here are pretty young and they haven't been working as editors. And a complaint we hear a lot is that we give the editing knowledge which we create to the publishers as well. And this is not very much discussed because what constitutes a good publication is done by the editorial work. And the editorial work is pretty much done by the systems provided by the publishers. So we leave, in fact, the knowledge about the publications, knowledge in the knowledge process as well, what is a good publication, to the publishers as well. So we give, in fact, quite a lot more than just the right to the publication. We give the right to define what constitutes a good publication as well. And in the long run, this is also going to be a challenge because that's all now in the publishers' databases, and there is most likely no guarantee that we will get ever the information out.
Yes, and just to add up to your comment, this is, I mean, that also goes a little bit outside of my presentation, but there are many journals nowadays that they do open peer review and they do open contributions. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you can choose. I'm going to say this without discussing the implications of how to choose it and why choose it, and maybe this is not, there isn't something in your field that is good enough, but you can choose journals that they do that. They do open peer review, or journals that they have open contributions for peer review, where the sharing of the output comes to the rest of the world before the final publication, but in the more premature stage, which is the different versions and the different drafts of the outputs.
This may be a very technical point, but if you want to use the CC BY, for example, on your slides and still have work with other sort of license in there, you can just put, accept this, otherwise noted. And then you can still use it. It's a very technical point, but,
for example,
a lot of people use it on their
an image that I really wanted to use it, then I could mark one slide differently, or if there was an image, I could also mark the image with a different license.
Thank you.
Now, open access has grown a lot. And the thing is that what we should take into consideration was that the first journal was published in 1665, and it was the Transactions of the Royal Society. And the purpose of this journal, back then in the day, was so that people can communicate with each other. They wanted a way so that they can tell who is doing what and who is doing where and who is doing what and when is doing it and what they have discovered. And as you may think, things back then were a little bit different and the information was not growing that fast the way that it is now. And back in the 60s and the 70s, we had printed versions only because that was the way that we could do it. We wanted an intermediary to publish the research outputs, and we wanted someone to disseminate the research outputs to us. But nowadays, things are changing, and we're seeing in this graph that from 2000 until 2013, everything has changed so much, and there have been many funders' policies. There have been many institutions, for example, Harvard Institution, which is among the richest institutions in the whole world, who says that, you know what, I don't have money to pay all the subscriptions. This is why I'm forced to cancel some of the subscriptions that I'm paying. And we have funders creating open access policies. We have a very big establishment of open access journals, and more open access journals are being created. So this is the time for open access, and also it's the time for open science, because part of open science, one of the concepts behind open science, is also open access. Now, the growth of items in open access repositories, you should know that the UK has developed a very big scheme of repositories, a very big map of repositories, and 60% of the UK's research outputs are available, openly accessible through the repositories, through the green route. And as you can see, for those who are far away, the graph starts from 2004, and then it finishes in 2012. And you can see that in these years, that there has been a very big change in open access, and also the biggest change starts happening around 2009, and so 2009 starts here, and that's the first month of 2009, and it finishes here, and this is when open access starts getting off into the repositories, and then in 2012 we're seeing excuse me, that the items are even more. Now, we have records stored across open access repositories, and the number is big, and this information comes from Open Door. The Open Door is a very cool place to go to look for information. It lists the open access repositories, and it also has created some quality standards in order to find out which are the right repositories to list in its directory and which are not the right repositories to list in the directory. So if you want to find information about repositories and the records in their repositories, then you can go into Open Door and find the information in there. Now, one big thing that happens in the UK, and all open access advocates were very excited about this, is the HEFKI policy that has to do with the next ref. I know that there are many unknown words in my sentence, so HEFKI stands for Higher Educational Funding Council for England. This means that HEFKI gives money to the UK universities for research and teaching. It gives about 40% of the UK universities' money from research comes from HEFKI, and the other 30% of the money comes from teaching. Now, HEFKI has this research assessment exercise, which is called Research Excellence Framework, or as we call it, the REF. And when institutions do well in the REF, they rank high, they get money from HEFKI. The higher you rank, the more money you're getting. The lower you rank, the less money you are getting as an institution. Now, why is this important, and why the HEFKI open access policy is important? If you contradict HEFKI with Horizon 2020, for example, or another funding council, which is called Research Councils UK, that we have in the UK, the difference is that for Horizon 2020 or Research Councils UK, someone comes up with an idea and then creates the idea, writes down the idea, goes and submits the idea to Horizon 2020 or to Research Councils UK. With HEFKI, No one has to go and submit the idea. Provided that you work in a UK higher educational institution, you are being judged by HEFKI. And if you are in a UK higher educational institution under a research contract, then you are being judged by HEFKI. So this means that we don't talk about only people who go and apply, we talk about everyone under a research contract, and that it's not only the experienced researcher, that it's not only the professor, but this is also the postdoc, this is also the researcher who is a young, early career researcher. And what the HEFKI open access policy says is that they're promoting the green route to open access, self-archiving through the repositories, and they say that all outputs need to be submitted into an open access repository, may that be institutional or subject repository, within 3 months upon acceptance for publication. Therefore, this means that authors have a 3 months window period to submit everything into the repository. This doesn't necessarily mean that the output is going to be openly accessible. You have to respect, authors have to respect embargo periods imposed by the publishers. But the submission of the output needs to be within 3 months. Because if it's not within 3 months, then the output, it's not eligible for the next ref. And the next ref is in 2020. So this is when the new period starts. The previous ref ended this past December. And the policy, it was introduced this past year, and it's going to be implemented from the 1st of April 2016. So a big change for the UK landscape. As I said earlier, 60% of the UK's outputs are out there, are available through the green road to open access, and we are expecting to see more. Now, open access is not only about use, but it's also about reuse. It should be openly accessible outputs. It's not only about reading the output or be able to download the output, but it should be also about reusing it, let's say translating it into other languages, taking one graph from one paper and building on top of the graph, taking one mathematical formula on top of the paper and building on this mathematical formula, but also allowing machines, data, information, text mining, data mining to take place out of open access outputs. I have one video, and perhaps some of you have seen it, about open access, which if we have time, we're going to see in the end. Now, since we talk about reusing open access content, I'm just going to talk a little bit about aggregation, harvesting, and what is this that we do at CORE. Now, CORE, it's the Confederation of Open Access Repositories, and what they have created is that they have created standard rules for sharing information. Now, what they talk about is the fact that, yes, we have all these institutional and subject repositories out there, and yes, we have all this knowledge in those repositories, but can we, how easy is it to share the information between the repositories? How easy is it to make one repository talk to the other repository? How easy is it to have systems talking to each other? For example, in the UK, we have a lot of the current research information systems, what they're called as CRIS, and one of the CRIS systems is PURE. PURE, as a CRIS system, doesn't talk to the research repository. So that's a bad thing. But if things were only between CRIS systems and repositories, things wouldn't have been that bad. The thing is that some repositories don't even talk to each other. So this is even worse. So there needs to be, and this is what the CORE manifesto says, that there needs to be interoperability between connecting repositories and connecting, thus, the knowledge, the outputs in the repository. Now, what is an aggregation? Aggregation means that on the blue barrels on the very left on the side, there are the different repositories everywhere in the world, and then there is someone in the middle of, and what this thing and what this person, what this machine does is that it collects everything into one point, and then what it does it provides standardized text, standardized communication, and then it spreads this information to the users. You're using aggregators in your everyday life, and perhaps you don't know about it. So in the print world, for example, we have supermarkets. You don't have to go to the butcher only to buy meat, and you don't have to go to the fish market to buy fish. You go to the supermarket and you buy everything. So art galleries, museums, libraries, of course, you don't have to go to the bookstore to buy books, another bookstore to buy journals. In the digital world, we have digital libraries. You use, for example, aggregators when you do your traveling. For example, when you want to find out which is the cheapest flight to Helsinki to fly here. Those of you who came from abroad, probably you went to Trivago or Momondo or one of those websites that they are out there, because perhaps you didn't have the knowledge or you didn't have the time to go into every airline website and try to find which is the best airline company, which is the cheapest airline company, and then write it down, and then start comparing prices, start comparing times, and all those things. And you have online retailers, for example, like Amazon, and newspapers. So you have been using, I have been using, all of us have been using aggregators very often. And then, why do we use them? As I said earlier, we do it because it's fast. We do it because it provides information that we find value. So we see that aggregators provide an added value to the information that we offer, because they enrich the content with new information, because they provide this little extra that you may not find somewhere else. And also because they provide harmonized access to the users. You don't have to go to separate websites, learn how its website works. You only go to one, you know how this website works, you're fine with this. You don't have to spend a lot of effort and time to work on something. And then enables the discovery of new information, because probably you know that there is Finnair to travel to Helsinki, and probably you know that there is British Airways, but are there other airline companies? And are there other airline companies that don't go directly from the UK, but they go from other parts of Europe? So they provide new information, aggregators, about things that perhaps you don't know. But the problem is that few aggregators provide unrestricted access to data. And that's one very big thing. And we have typically little or no support on open data. But I'm not going to talk a lot about open data, but I just wanted to put this information out over there, because you're going to see open data a lot in the future. Now, at CORE, what we do? Well, JISC is one funding council in the UK, and what they do is that they fund projects mostly in scholarly communications. They work closely with publishers, and they work closely with projects. And what they did is that they created this project, this paper, which is called the Monitor paper. And they decided that, yes, the UK now has many repositories. The UK has approximately 135 academic institutions, and there are approximately 125, maybe 28 research repositories. By research repositories, I mean the ones that they collect the research outputs, the ones that everyone worries about, which is the HEFKI and the REF. But apart from that, institutions, they don't only have one repository. They may have another repository for dissertations and theses. They may have other repositories for different projects that they have been running. Another repository, for example, for, let's say, the biology department or the geography department, because they have different needs. But this information was getting lost because we were missing the one medium to make all this information come up. And this is why they have decided that they should give CORE support to create the service and to provide access to all this information that they are out there. Now, the CORE's mission is to aggregate all the content and give the content out there to everyone in the world. When we talk about content, we only mean about openly accessible content. This means that the end user doesn't have to pay a fee to access it. This is why I told you that Core, it's a little better than Google Scholar, because in Google Scholar you may come up with results that you have to pay to access them. But on the other hand, in Core, you're going to have information that it's only provided openly accessible, which may mean that you're losing those outputs that they are out there, that you will have to pay to access them. So two different things to consider. And what we're doing is that we're collecting different information from different systems out there through the Open Archives Initiative Metadata Harvesting Protocol, as I said earlier, and we have created a set of services and tools to enable and allow users to use this information. Now, Core is out there in the public since 2011, and it has received money from many institutions and many funding councils. The reason that I have this graph over there is because I want to show you that it has taken money from the European Union, from England, from Norway and WO. So this means that there is an importance, and the meaning for aggregation is of top priority, not only in the UK, but also in the rest of Europe, and also in the rest of the world. And generally, the aggregation process means that there is a repository somewhere out there in the world, and then we collect the information that we need so that we gain access to the repository's information. We take this information, we do all the process that needs to be done, and then we disseminate the information back to the public in a slightly different form, in the form that it is a little bit more centralized and understandable. Now, the processing pipeline, which is part of what I'm doing when I go to work, it's we download metadata, we check that the metadata is correct. If the metadata is not correct, then we try to find ways to make it correct. We try to find out what is it that we are missing. We do harvesting of full text, we do harvesting of authors, we do citation harvesting, we do harvesting of images, parsing. So there is a list of things that needs to be done. Harvesting a repository takes time depending on the type of repository. For example, 3 months ago, we added into our system Harvard University's repository, DAS. And we had some problems because we couldn't download all the full text, and there was about 3,000 full texts that they were missing, and we couldn't find out where they were gone, and were they like lost in this black hole and we couldn't find it. So it would take me about 10 days to do all the process for the Harvard repository. And then I would do the whole process. I wouldn't find a problem while I was doing the process, but then in the end, again, there wasn't a match of how many outputs DAS has and how many outputs I would find, and then I would have to do the whole thing again. So it was a very exciting time in my life. I was really happy about it. And what is the difference between Core and, for example, other search engines such as Google Scholar or Microsoft? The thing is that Core provides 3-level access to information, and that level access is the programmable, the transaction, and the analytical. And the programmable means that something can be used by developers, and it can be used in a way that it can be shared through an API or another type of technology that someone wants to use. Now, the transaction information access means that the user can get into a search engine and find the information. This is something that Google Scholar and Microsoft provide as a service. But the analytical information access, which means access to the statistical information and all the information, the graphs and all the information that has to do with the way that the repositories work and are being used, is not available over there. Therefore, Core does not only try to make users take advantage of the transaction information access, but also the last two, the programmable and the analytical information access. Because the programmable access is helpful for developers and people who work in companies and researchers, and the analytical information access is helpful for funders and people who are making the policies, people who want to find out the government and what kind of information they want to find out from these publications. And to support this three-level information, we have created different services at CORE. So for example, regarding the programmable access, we have the CORE API and we have the CORE data dumps. And for the transactional information access, we have the CORE portal, which is the search engine where people can search information, the CORE mobile, and then the CORE plugin. And for the analytical information access, we have the repository analytics and the CORE policy compliance analytics, which has to do with the HEFKI policy, and then the repositories dashboard, which is something new that we are building right now, which means that now what happens is that if one output is full text in the repository, then this output is being harvested into CORE as a full text. But let's say that the output needs to be taken down because the author made a mistake, or the author needs to publish the article or something like that. What happens now is that repository managers email me, and what I do is that I take down the output. But through the dashboard, all repository managers whose repositories are being harvested by CORE, they will be able to have access to CORE, and they will be able to take down these papers themselves, but they will also be able to gain information from CORE regarding statistics of the CORE usage and information related to that. And this is how the information is being exposed to the rest of the world. The transaction access, the raw data access, and the analytical access, and the different tools. These slides are going to be online, and I just don't want to spend a lot of time on those. I just want to show you a little bit to make you familiar with the service. The CORE portal, in reality, is just the search engine where you can get in, type in keywords, and get access to information you need. Then we have a CORE mobile application for Android and iOS, which can be downloaded from iTunes along with the rest of the Knowledge Media Institute applications. And then we also have the CORE plugin. I find the plugin to be a little bit of cool, because what happens is that the plugin goes into one research repository, and what it does is that when a user searches for a research paper, then of course the repository is going to give the results of the research paper, but the plugin, in the very end, it also shows you articles that they are similar to the paper that you're looking for, and it matches the keywords. And it's not only outputs that they are within this repository, but they are outputs within the CORE system. So I like that a lot. So that's also another screenshot of the recommendations of the plugin. And then we also have the tool for open journal systems. And here we have repository analytics. For example, if you want to find out how repositories are doing, you can go to the repository analytics in CORE, and you can find out information. I don't know if users used a lot, but we get a lot of questions from repository managers regarding this. This is the tool on the CORE applications that it's under development. So what we are doing is, as I said, for the repository dashboard, is that people are going to be able to see what kind of outputs they have over there. One of the reasons that we are doing it, it's because we want to help also repository managers to comply better with funders' policies, because there are a lot of technicalities, and there is a process that needs to be taken into consideration, and we want to give them the advantage of themselves having access to the system instead of emailing us, and then we would need to respond to them in due time and do everything the way that they want. Now, the definition for open access for the post-2014 ref is that the information needs to be accessible through a UK repository. And it needs to be made available as a final peer-reviewed text, and it needs to be harvestable during automated tools in a machine-readable form and unambiguously identifiable. And the reason that I've added this slide over there, it's because this includes everything that I wish every funder's policy would say. The fact that it's accessible, the fact that it's available, the fact that it's harvestable, the fact that it's machine readable, the fact that it's the information it's out there, and it's unambiguously identifiable. What I really don't like the hefty policy that much is because it has long embargo periods and it doesn't specify on a specific Creative Commons license, but that's okay. So that's another screenshot of the developed tool. And core, it has 24 million records right now, 670 repositories, 1.8 million full text. And core has been placed among the top 10 search engines beyond Google. And it's listed among top 100 thesis and dissertation resources. And it's part of the JISC repository search services project. And the other projects are the Sherpa Romeo, which has to do with, it's a service that has to do with embargo periods and journals' copyright licenses, and vocabularies for open access, and the RJ Broker and the JISC Monitor projects. And right now what we're doing is that we're exploring a partnership with JISC to deliver core further on. And hopefully we're going to have good news. And core is being used by big organizations such as the European Library and UNESCO and the Open Access Button. And the repository communities such as the OR, the REAX, and IRUS UK. And we have 20 minutes. Now, I have 3 things. The first thing is that we need to take questions. The other thing is that I found an open access quiz that I would like very much all of us to do together. And the other one is that I have a video on open access, which is 8 minutes from the PhD comics. Now, my first question would be, have you all seen the video from the PhD comics on open access? No. Okay. Who has seen the video? Oh, not that many. Okay. So I think we have to take questions, and then we'll see how.
Hey, I'm Huang Chen from Technical Research Institute of Sweden. So thank you for the very nice presentation. And I'm wondering that the core is like aggregate open access contents of articles. And I'm not sure how all the articles are peer-reviewed or the quality of the articles. Or anyone can upload it.
So what happens, as I said earlier, is that repositories do not conduct peer review. Repositories, they host material peer-reviewed somewhere else. So institutions collect material from their academics. And these materials, these outputs, they are hosted into the institutional repository. And what core does is that it goes and it grabs all this material from the institutional repository, and then it brings it into the central search engine. So it's not our part to be able to assess the quality of the research outputs. And to be frank, I don't think that it's also the institution's part. The peer reviews conducted either, as I said earlier, in conference proceedings or in journals. But the truth is that repositories don't always have peer-reviewed content. They may have non-peer-reviewed content. And the other thing is that the service is not about creating a service with the best quality research outputs. It's a service with open access outputs.
Yeah, thanks. And I also have another question that because I'm not very much, I don't have much knowledge about this open access, but I'm very curious that many researchers, they are interested in publishing the papers in some journals with a high impact factor. And what's the motivations of this course that the researchers are eager to publish the results or have their results being available in these repositories?
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing is that unfortunately, at least unfortunately for me, the academia works in its own way. So there are journals with high impact factors, and academics and researchers and professors, they need to publish in those. And in some departments, they also give them a list with the journals that they need to publish if they want to be considered as good academics. What I would say is that they can go and publish if that's what they need in their career at that moment, is that they can go and publish whatever they want. Because the vast majority of the journal publishers, almost 90% of them, they allow the self-archiving of the output into the repository. So they can do what they find that it's beneficial for their career, and then at the same time, they can do what is beneficial for open access and the rest of the world to have access to their research output by self-archiving it into a repository. Now, the ones who want to publish in open access journals, again, I understand that there are some open access journals that they're not so much established out there. And if we take into consideration how much time subscription-based journals they have in the history of publishing and the fact that they have managed to establish themselves, comparing to open access journals, then we can see how this is not going to be an even case, a balanced case. Now, what makes a good open access publication? It's the same standards that makes a good closed access publication. If academics find that for them it's more beneficial to have their paper viewed by the greater amount of people, because open access publications is proof that they have greater citation rates, then it's up to them to decide if they would like to go with an open access journal that doesn't have a high impact factor, or they would like to go with a closed access journal that has a high impact factor. But the closed access journal is not going to bring that many citations. The open access journal is going to bring more citations.
Yeah, thanks.
I was wondering, if I have a publication somewhere in a closed access journal, how can I find out if I'm allowed actually to put it on a repository?
Yes, so that's a very good question. So there is this, well, first of all, what you can do is that you can go to the journal's publishers' websites and try to find this information yourself. And good luck with that, because the vast majority of the journal publishers, they don't have well-managed websites and they try to miss this information. There is one service, and we have internet, right? There is one service which is called, oops. There is one service which is called Sherpa Romeo. Sherpa, in general, it's a service that has that deals with policies and publication and publishers' rights. Sherpa Romeo deals with publisher copyright policies and self-archiving, but there is also Sherpa Juliet, and what it does, Sherpa Juliet, is that it gives, if, for example, you have money from a funder, and you're not quite sure what is the funder's policy, or if the funder has a policy to begin with, then you can go to Sherpa Juliet and find out information about it. Now, in Sherpa Romeo, what you can do is that you can search through the journal title, and then you get a basic table that gives you information about it. So, can someone give me a journal title? Now, a journal title. Journal title. Solid, oops. Solid
State circuits. Secrets. Kind of electronic.
right?
Yep.
Exact title, journal title, OSS, and search.
Cases, IEEE, solicited secrets. Yes, but contains issue. IEEE.
Can you repeat the journal title again?
Solid state circuits.
Contains Solid search. IEEE is not very. Very good example. IEEE is not very into open access. I hate that. The information that you can find is a journal title. Make sure that you double check the ISSN so that you make sure that you're getting the right information. And this is a Romeo Green journal. And the information that users can see is that authors preprint. Okay, difference between preprint, postprint, and published version. There are many words that can be used to define these three different versions. And publishers use their own words. Librarians, like myself, we use our own words, and maybe your colleagues, that being said, like other academics in other fields, they may be using other words. But what I've been trying to do is that I've been trying to use those words as standard words only because I direct people to Sherpa Romeo and I want them to be familiar with them. But preprint considers something that hasn't had any peer review. Preprint considers something that sits on your computer and it hasn't had a peer reviewed or like an authoritative peer review. Postprint is something after peer review, and the postprint can have many different versions depending on how lucky you get in the peer review. It can go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, maybe many times. And then when you have the publisher's Persian PDF, this 99% of the times belongs to the publisher. If you are about to publish in a subscription-based journal, then this is the publisher's 99.9%. The publisher's version, unless you have paid an article processing charge. Then it is your version. Now, the information that you can get, if we scroll down, apart from this basic information, the fact that the author can archive the preprint or the postprint, is that you can also get information in the general condition. And this information can be, if you archive the preprint, how would we like the information to be shown in the repository about the article citation? Or maybe here, and those are like the crazy rules that publishers have. Author's preprint must be accompanied with a set phrase when accepted by IEEE for publication. Copyright 2000 XXX, personal use of this material is permitted. Permission from IEEE must be obtained to all users, blah, 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 blah. So if you scroll further down, you will also find if it has mandated open access. Compliance data is available for 12 funders and then paid open access. So it takes you to the information on how much, if it has a gold route to open access and how much money you're going to pay for APCs. Copyright, and that's all. Yes? Any more questions? The quiz or the video, what do you want?
Quiz up for the video.
Open up, quiz up for the quiz? Well, the video then. And you do the quiz another time. Yes.
Open access is free, immediate, online availability of research articles with full reuse rights. This is about, first of all, making all this content available for anyone, wherever they are in the world, to read and access and build upon, so people can do interesting things and work in new ways with the material to really make the research literature much more valuable.
The history of the model is really publishing scientific manuscripts, especially ones with complex, detailed color figures, was expensive. And so if you wanted your article distributed broadly and widely, you sent it to one of these journals, and then they would manage the review process and the communications with reviewers and revisions, and eventually something would be accepted, and they handled the typesetting and the printing and the distribution of your scientific work. And And it worked. It worked great. Science progressed pretty well, and it became, a good way to distribute scientific papers. And what's changed is, really two things in essence. First is digitization. You can now do everything electronically instead of printing it. And the second is that the journals started ratcheting up the price of subscriptions to many of their journals. And so those two things came sort of to a head where it's become almost the theater of the absurd with the amount that some journals want libraries to pay to subscribe to the journal.
Research has shown that journal prices have actually outpaced inflation by over 250% over the past 30 years. There are over 15 entire academic disciplines where the average price for one journal is over $1,000 for one subscription for 1 year. Yeah, in chemistry, the average title is $4,227, and physics $3,649, and it even goes down into like agriculture is still over $1,000, and geology and botany all over $1,000. And those are just the averages. Those aren't like the, way out there. So there's a journal called Tetrahedron that's $40,000.
The journals aren't producing the material. The journals don't employ the people who write the papers. They don't even employ the people who review the papers. And it doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of what science is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about discovering new things and spreading that knowledge around. It's so irrational to think that these scientists like me are paid by the government to do research and to discover things and distribute that. And then, 2 years of work by 20 people is going to be compressed into a paper and then not made available to people. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, so I think this problem of access to research is one that people run into all the time, but it's not one that they sort of realize. I know when I was a student, whenever I would be doing research and come across a great abstract and not have access to it, I just sort of moved on and thought, well, this is the way it is. I didn't really realize that there was a system behind this, that was causing me to not have access. And I think students' educations literally depend on access to the journal literature. Professors can only teach what they have access to. If you look at less wealthy countries, like low and middle income countries, they really, really struggle to get access. And, so that's a real impediment that prevents researchers in those countries from being able to contribute fully or do world-class research.
I was not, even with this lack of access and even with my brother starting the Public Library of Science, I wasn't convinced. I didn't understand why this was a big deal. And then we had a family medical emergency, and I was up at 3 in the middle of the night in a hospital next to my wife in the hospital room, surfing the web on the crappy hospital wireless internet. And I was trying to find out information about a particular medical treatment, and I couldn't get access to the damn papers. And our doctors didn't know the answer to these particular questions, and we needed to decide about what to do with this medical treatment. And here I was, a trained scientist, with the ability to read and interpret and understand many of these papers, and I couldn't get them. And that was the moment for me. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Here's what the problem comes down to in most cases. And because in the hospital room, I bought dozens of articles. The problem is that you don't know which article is relevant until after you pay for it. The abstracts don't always make it clear what is contained in the paper. So there was no return policy, right? I couldn't buy it and then say, this is wrong, I'm giving it back. So now are you going to spend $1,200 to just find out if possibly they're relevant? If you do that every day, you're in a big hole. I'm not, some communist saying everything should be free and, I don't believe in corporations. Nobody is saying that publishing is free. What people are saying is that we need to work on models where the government that is already paying for the research and is then paying for the subscriptions and is then paying for the indirect costs for the libraries. In the end, taxpayers and the government are paying for this. So why can't we do it in a way where the knowledge is distributed broadly as opposed to the knowledge is restricted?
So there are two components of open access. The first is that articles are available for free to read so that you don't hit that paywall when you click to read the full text. But the second part of the definition that's every bit as important is that the articles come with full reuse rights so that scientists and researchers can build an entire new tier of tools on top of the research literature. And those new tools can interact with these articles, right? They can mine the articles, they can find relationships They can find snippets of genetic code that are mentioned in multiple papers, or different phrases, or concepts that are referenced in a biology paper and a chemistry paper. That individual researchers would never be able to uncover because they can't read this many articles. So if you actually wanted to do that, you couldn't, because you would have to negotiate individual rights with every single publisher in order to do that. In an open access world, all this information would be open on the internet for free, and people would have unrestricted rights, to do that kind of data mining.
I think the main impediment is the incredibly slow movement of scientific cultural practices. I think, scientists, despite being great explorers in terms of knowledge, are sort of very conservative in terms of changing their practices. Lots of the community says, oh yeah, I support openness, but I want a Nature paper. That sort of reliance upon, impact factor and the name of the journal does allow some journals to not respond to the community pressure towards openness. The scientific publishing model that we have now, there's no evidence that it is optimal. We need to experiment with all sorts of different scientific publishing systems. Corporations may figure that out before governments do. I'm very open to whoever is going to come up with creative solutions to these issues. I view it much more as scientists and scientific publishers are slow to change. Some of them are going to be left in the dirt because openness is clearly the future, and the creative ones are gonna survive.
It's really important that graduate students, start these conversations with their research teams, their PIs, just let them know that it's something that they care about. And, there's a real benefit to researchers, to graduate students by doing this, right? Because the more people that see your work, the more people can build upon it, and they'll cite you. It's not just good for the person that can read your paper, it's also good for you.
I believe that scientific knowledge spreads and increases best if there are no restrictions on access to the knowledge that has been generated in other places. I want the discovery of new scientific knowledge to happen faster, and openness helps accelerate that.
Even if, for your own reasons, you need to publish in a subscription journal, there is this other option that even if you don't publish in an open access journal, that you can still make, the text of the article itself freely available so that people can at least read it and get access to it.
Shall we? Yes? Thank you.